This is the all-new 4th generation Nissan X-Trail, the mid-size SUV that's gunning for the RAV4 and CX-5. And when it arrives in Australia towards the end of this year, well, it will debut a stylish new design, a fresh new underpinnings and an advanced hybrid powertrain that's said to blend the driving experience of an EV without ever having to plug it in. Let's check it out. So the new X-Trail arrives in Australia at a particularly busy time for Nissan Australia, because not only will it star towards the end of this year, it will also arrive at the same time as the smaller Qashqai and the bigger Pathfinder. But I think this car has what it takes to make an impression because, well, just look at it. It's such a huge improvement over the, well, quite frankly, forgettable last generation. So I've already mentioned the new platform. This X-Trail will be based on the same CMF-C as the Outlander, Mitsubishi Outlander, and the X-Trail, and that brings a huge raft of improvements when it comes to powertrains and technology. Powertrains. Under the bonnet in Australia, there will be the choice of a revised version of the last generation's 2.5 litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, but the car beside us is the far more technically interesting e-Power e-Force hybrid. So we've already driven the e-Power powertrain in a couple of cars. We drove it in the Note K car in Japan, and we also drove it earlier this year in the Qashqai. And just to remind you how it works, basically there's a combustion engine that has no connection to the wheels. What actually drives the wheels are an electric motor, or in the case of the e-Force, 2 electric motors. So in the X-Trail, the e-Power consists of a combustion engine, but not just any combustion engine. This has Nissan's Trick variable compression 1.5 litre 3-cylinder turbo, and it produces 116 kilowatts and 250 newton meters of torque. Well, it does produce that in Europe, but because we have 91 octane fuel, it's been homologated to 106 kilowatts. But it doesn't matter, because remember, this car is driven by its electric motors, and that explains why this car actually produces 157 kilowatts and 525 newton meters of torque, because on the front axle you have a 150 kilowatt electric motor, and on the rear axle you have another 100 kilowatt electric motor. So feeding both electric motors current is a small 1.9 kilowatt hour battery that provides for a range of just 3 kilometers, which sounds pretty pathetic, doesn't it, compared to some plug-in hybrids that are now offering at least 60 kilometers of pure EV range. But this, remember, doesn't need plugging in, and Nissan claims in an urban environment around 80% of your journeys will be done on pure electric power alone. So there's real savings here. But as far as performance goes, it's pretty quick. 0 to 100 kilometers per hour takes around 7 seconds, while top speed is limited to around 180 kilometers per hour. And that's limited because this is no transmission. This is direct drive. So it's really, really smooth. As far as efficiency goes, well, it's on paper not that good. It's 6.1 litres per 100 kilometres, but it's still pretty impressive for its class. Inside the new Nissan X-Trail, well, the mid-size SUV benefits from many of the upgrades the recently introduced Qashqai received, and it also gets Nissan's latest in-car tech. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a 10.8-inch head-up display. We're talking about a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster, and entry models get an 8-inch infotainment system, but this gets the larger 12.3-inch infotainment. That looks really smart. And things like fit, finish and quality, well, it's a league above the car it replaces. It's also worth mentioning that on STL trims and above, the X-Trail also gets Nissan semi-autonomous ProPilot cruise control. In the back of the X-Trail, it's yet more good news because you get the Qashqai's wide opening doors. These things open up to 85 degrees for easy access to the cabin. There's also plenty of leg and headroom, and there's also a sliding rear bench seat that prioritises either luggage space or legroom. In the back of the X-Trail, there is plenty of space for your luggage, and it's as practical as it's ever been. There's also 40-20 split rear seats, but for the Australian market, the hybrid version does not get the option of a third row of seats. So behind the wheel of the new X-Trail, it is, well, instantly a dramatic improvement, and that's partly because, well, it's just so refined and quiet and smooth. And that's because of this e-Power powertrain that's only been enhanced by the addition of an extra rear motor. So what do we mean? Well, the first thing is, beside the Qashqai, it just has so much more urge off the line. The old Qashqai, well, it just felt little bit slow and very unlike an EV. But this thing changes it because of that huge 525 Newton meter torque peak. What is a strange feeling in the X-Trail is the way it just flies up hills in particular, and that's because of the EV nature. It's got electric motors driving after all. But the confusing bit is the noise of the combustion engine when it is running just doesn't correspond to what's happening. So at times the X-Trail feels, well, a lot faster than it actually is, which is no bad thing. What is strange with the new X-Trail is the way it just sort of flies along this piece of road with very little input from the throttle, and that's because of the EV powertrain and immense levels of torque available. And I think owners will really prefer it, not only over a traditional diesel powered SUV, but also over rivals like, well, the Toyota RAV4 hybrid that seems to always have to work a little bit harder to get along a stretch of road. So what don't we like? Well, I think the X-Trail actually rides quite poorly over some of these roads we're driving, and that's because the springs are very stiff. Worse still, there's quite a bit of body roll when you do push on, and the steering, well, it's not that precise, so this is not a sports SUV. Now, Nissan doesn't market the X-Trail as a proper off-roader. It's mainly for people who live in cities. But with the e-Force, you do have some capability if you ever hit the rough. And that's because without any mechanical connection between front and rear electric motor, it can infinitely, well, manage and shuffle the torque front to rear. But it's not just front to rear, because it can also use the brakes across the axle as well. So basically, the computers can find the single tyre with the amount of grip to haul you out of, well, a sticky situation. So there we have it. Off-road, the all-new Nissan X-Trail is as capable as, well, any other mid-size SUV in the segment. When it arrives in Australia towards the end of 2022, it will be priced around $36,750, except that isn't this car we're driving. That's for the entry-level 2.5 litre. We think it's worth spending $4,200 extra for the e-Power e-Force that arrives early on in 2023, because it's then you get a car that, well, finally you'd actually choose over a RAV4 hybrid, because this is, well, it's a better drive, it's more sophisticated, it's smoother, more refined, and, well, just like an EV, you don't have to charge.